Okay, good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're at the bottom of page 1239. Aleph Reish Lamed Tes. So we're discussing, the context of the discussion is coming to explain the Zohar that he cited on top of page 1237, which was regarding the role of the metzach, the forehead, on a spiritual terms. What role does it play and what is its function? So he called it the Heskem, the determination, because it conceals the moichin within, just like a forehead. You don't see the intelligence and the intellect in a revealed way. So what remains is the determination that came out of an intellectual process. So as he explained, there are two levels of rotzen. There's a rotzen that's l'mayla mitam v'das, what he called rotzen elyon. And there's a rotzen that rotzen is from etzem nefesh, which means it's from the core being of the person. And the second level of rotzen atachten, is a rotzen that's an outgrowth of seichel and tam. And that second level, they explain two different situations. One is when that reasoning and the logic is shining in a very revealed way. So it permeates and vitalizes and creates that rotzen is very passionate and dynamic. Or you forget the reasoning, like he explained afterwards in Avodah, like after davening, and during davening you're all stimulated and your mind is contemplating on the divine, but after davening, or in general, after the contemplation passes, so now it doesn't disappear completely. What dissipates is the intellectual vitality of it, but the conclusion, the determination and the commitment that was made remains strong and unwavering. And in many ways, even stronger, as he pointed out at the bottom of page 1237. But it's only a commitment. So therefore, as he explained, in Rotzen HaTachten, that's like the level of Zah, of the Midas. So there's a determination is there, but the Midas are still have their severities and their judgments, because they've not been refined. They are like the Midas of someone that the mind is not in control. And like he said with a child or someone that's immature, they're easily judgmental and easily severe because their Midas are not refined yet. Whereas Arich Ampin apparently is like a Rotzen Elyon. Arich Ampin, when that's revealed, then the Midas become refined. But we didn't get there yet, so I'm not going to jump to that. But then he explained, just as it is in Rotzen HaTachten, also the Rotzen Elyon, even though he did say it's higher than Das, L'mayla Matam, but it also has Bedugma, because it also encompasses the spheres in it, so it also has Chabad and Chagas, Moichin and Midas. However, they're concealed and they're unlimited at that state. This I'm reading from page 1238. So they remain concealed, they call the dark mountains, but there is something there. However, it's a tam komus. It's a concealed reason. In Rotzen HaTachten, it's a revealed reason. You can relate to it, you can understand it. In Rotzen Elyon, it's a concealed reason. But that itself, he explained on page 1239, he went into two different levels of that concealment. It could be a concealed reason, but it's still accessible and something is revealed from it. The lower level of Moichis Timah, Chachmis Timah, I should say. So it is concealed, practically speaking, but it's not completely removed. And there's a level, what he calls the Heskem, which in this case, we're talking about something like Shtoik Kachola B'machshava. Be silent, that's what arose my will, meaning it's something that is not fathomable or understandable at all, from the perspective of the recipient. In this case, Moshe Rabbeinu, Chachmei Law of Atzilus, cannot in any way understand any given reason or pleasure that there would be from Rabbi Akiva being tortured in such a barbaric way. So this means it's completely off limits. The only one that knows is God himself, like he said. That he called Moiched Atika. That was the expression he used a few times. Just want to say the exact lesson. Chachmis Timoi Lo Da'atika. This is Chachmis Timoi Lo Da'atika. And this, there's no gili at all. And you're talking about the tam komus, the concealed reason, and the midas that exist in the Ratzon. Like we said, the Ratzon has in it the desire for different inclinations. So yes, it's true, it's concealed, but it's still not completely removed from the netzalim, from the emanations. But now we're talking about the higher level is completely removed. Okay. So this this is a summary all the way to the bottom of page 1239. And then came the last section we learned on Friday, the last year, the last class, Ulefizem move on. Now he brings, according to this, it's understood that the Heskem of Arich, that this Heskem in the level of Arich, meaning the higher level, where it's completely concealed, this concealment is only compared to the recipients and also the 10 spheres of Atzilus. That on their level, this is a Heskem Levad. The only thing they know is that this is what God wants. That's the only thing that's revealed. Beyond that, he says, Einam Meir Behem B'chinas Tam. There's no tam radiating in them, no reason. The Hein B'chinas Chochmas Stimov Adla. So clearly he's talking about the higher level than Adla. V'Heskem Hu Mailim Alzeh Shenira Kamoshu Bli Tam Legamri. And this determination conceals on anything and it appears as if there's no reason at all. If anything,
Radlo is Atik.
I'm talking about the higher level, of course.
Radlo is Atik.
Radlo is an Atik. That's what he said on page 1238, 1237, on top of 1237. Yeah. Well, it could be the Atik within Arich. I already pointed out that it's not so 100% clear exactly what level he's talking, but he's clearly talking about the higher level. And it seems to be that Arich also is there. Amid is the Arich Hampin bechinas atam komos, harizem bekomokim bechinas gili legaben etzal. So the midas of Arich Hampin, of the Ratzon Elyon, and the tam komos, which we're calling a tam komos, it's concealed, but it doesn't mean it's not completely removed from the emanations. Al bechinas Heskem. That the pnimius, the inner dimension, is completely concealed. The gamma heskem is gili mamish bepnimius. And also the heskem, as I tried to explain, even the very determination is not really a gili. It's just that's what we have. It's not like a pnimius dikagil that we can relate to. Now, I just want to go over this last few lines because I struggled with it a bit, but I looked up. I think I mentioned. I mentioned. This whole section is based on a mimer that was said by the Alter Rebbe. And it's the Biuri Hazer of the Mittler Rebbe, where he explains this whole Zohar. But I found some more sources from the Alter Rebbe. There's a mimer of Asisa Tzitz, about the tzitz that was placed on the forehead of Aaron. So there it says, V'hoya al netzach Aaron tamid. That this tzitz, how do you translate tzitz? Was a form of like a headband that Aaron the Kohen Gadol wore, and he wore it on his forehead. So there's a mimer from the Alter Rebbe, which is the Mittler Rebbe wrote down, and then the Tzemach Tzedek explains, that discusses these two levels of Ratzon, and combined with the Biur Hazeh that I mentioned, it all comes together. The Rebbe Rashab is citing from all of there. Actually, this very section we're learning now, I found there was that Tzemach Tzedek's word for word from the Tzemach Tzedek explaining the mimer of the Alter Rebbe. And there's actually words there that make it a little clearer. So like we said, Avaloisha Helam, this few lines that we're learning is from Eira Teira Tetzaveh. Pasha Tetzaveh is where the Pasuk speak about the tzitz that was on the forehead of Aaron. And that's what he says, that it was always on the forehead and had to be there because it remains, it sits is on the Metzach. The Metzach is the Heskem. The Heskem is the determination. So the Seichel, the Meichin, is not always radiating. But the Heskem is always there. That's what means Tamid. It's always on Aaron's forehead. He's always aware of it. Like we said, even after davening, he explains in Aveda this idea that even after davening, a Reshim, something remains all the time. What's the Reshim? It's the Heskem. That's why it's on Metzach. I don't want to go through the whole Maimer, but I just wanted to point out that this section is word for word from the Tzemach Tzedek. And yes, indeed, this is the Chiddush she's saying now. And this is, as he says, that this concealment that we're talking about, of that the deeper, the Heskem, that from the point of view of the recipients and of the 10 spheres of Atzilus, there's only the determination, there's no absolute no revelation. Shtei kachol of machshav, he says, this Helam is only compared to the Makablim and the Tzolim. But Lagabi Arich Hampin, lo yisha Helam Lagabi Arich Hampin Atzme, the Sham Meir Ha'er. So Arich Hampin itself does have a revelation of Er. So you can't say the Helam that we're talking about is only lower than Arich Hampin. But Adarabah, Er Elyon Yesod, the Hena Atzmis Chachmis Temor canal, a very high Er, because it has the core of Chachmas Temor. So clearly he's saying that Arich Hampin has access to that core, even though initially it seemed that that was Atik. But even so, Arich Hampin basically is closer to Atik than Chachma, Vatzilus, and the spheres are. So it has access. And the Etzem and the Ratzon itself in Arich is the very core desire that's higher than the Tam Komus. The Tam Komus, we said, the hidden reason is hidden, but it's still accessible. And either in time we could understand it, or it's just a matter of digging deeper, or at least we know there's a reason that we may not know the reason, but we know there's a depth behind it. Whereas when something like Shtei Kachol Machshavah, he said Mufrach Lagamri, completely, it defies logic, it defies reason altogether. That's a good word, by the way. Defies reason. That's the word I was looking for. Mufrach. Completely defies our way of thinking. Okay. And that's where we stopped there. So, as I explained in the last class, the point he's making here is that even though it's completely beyond us, but it's not, because we can access the lower levels of Arich Hampin, which are closer to the Netzalim, the Tam Komus, and Arich Hampin does have some inkling of what's on a higher level, like the rungs of a ladder. It's not a complete leap. He hasn't explained how we access the higher level, except by saying it's God's Ratzon. Remember, I mentioned that itself is also something. If you fulfill, it says in Chassidus, it talks about the Chukim Edus Mishpatim. There are three types of mitzvahs. Mitzvahs that are rational mitzvahs, Mishpatim, Elam Mishpatim. What means rational? It means completely logical. That not only is it logical, that even if we were not told in the Torah, we would also come to that conclusion. For example, not to steal, not to murder. These are rational mitzvahs. They are mitzvahs of God, but they make sense completely. It doesn't defy any logic. Edus are commemorative mitzvahs. Shabbos, Yom Tov. So these are not purely based on rational, but they're also not anti-rational. It's a beautiful thing. The Jews left Mitzrayim on Pesach, on the 15th of Nisan, so every year we honor that. So this is a mitzvah that we may not have come on our own, but again, it's within the bounds of our understanding. Then there's the third category, chukim. Chukim are super rational. L'mayla matam v'das, para aduma. The classic zeis chukas atera. That because there's an impurity of death, God says, take a red heifer, you bring it as an offering, you mix its ashes with water, with mayim chayim, you sprinkle that on the person, he's purified. What is it? Why? Well, what happens if it wasn't a red heifer? If God wants to purify, it could be many different ways. And go to the mikveh. He also has to do that, but I'm saying, so this is a chukah, to the point that Rashi brings and Medrash brings that Elam actually mock the Jews for these type of so-called, what they call irrational mitzvahs. We know it's super rational. It means it's beyond us. So the question is, why do we need these three categories? Why can't all the mitzvahs make sense? So one of the explanations is because the Eibishter wanted exactly the theme of Ayin Beis. He wanted an interface between godliness and us. If all mitzvahs were super rational, then it would never be bepnimius within us and our understanding. If all mitzvahs were rational, then we wouldn't have a taste of something of godliness that's beyond tam v'das. We know that God is not defined by logic. He created logic. At the same time, he wants to connect with us. So the Torah is a seichel dikut Torah, the seichel. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says that even mishpatim, really, if you really come down to it, there's also an element of l'mayla m'seichel, because that itself, why is this the seichel? Is, in other words, is logic logical? God made it logical. So it's true, it stops us now, but God was not bound by that. So even the mishpatim really have an element of chukim in it. And even a chok, as the Rambam says, even though we don't have an explanation, we try our best. In the end of Hilchas Temura and Me'ilah, the Rebbe would cite it very often, that even a paraduma, Chassidus comes and explains as much as possible. It still remains beyond, but once the Eibishter said it, we find different. For example, Chassidus explains that the fire and the water of the red heifer is Ratzeh and Shuv, and Ratzeh and Shuv brings life, just as an example. But fundamentally, the mitzvah could have been, the Eibishter could have done it a different way. Anyway, the point I want to make is that in this relationship with God that we have to have both elements. We have to have things that are on our terms, and there are things that are on God's terms. I mentioned this many, many times. And you really want to bring those two together. That's why there's das tachten, there's das elyon. Even though he doesn't use these words here, but it's very similar. Das elyon means Yedei das elyon, only God knows. Or there was Nevi'im, certain people were given, they were given privy to the higher way of thinking. But here, like for example, Shteika Chalab Machshava, even Moshe Rabbeinu cannot access that. But that's not means it's off limits. It means we're getting a taste of godliness that's beyond us. Now, that's not a justification why Rabbi Akiva was killed like that. We don't have a justification. We can't make sense of it. But we do see that God is at work here, and only God knows. On the other hand, the things that we relate to that do make sense are things on our terms. Then there's the Tam Komos, which I don't want to compare exactly to Chukim, Edus, Mishpatim, but you could say the Tam Komos is a reason, but we may not be privy to that reason right now. But it's not something that we cannot access at all. So in a way, again, I'm not saying these are the three levels. I'm just using it as an example. That bottom line is that you have three types of relationship, and they all work because at the end of the day, they come together. We have a taste of God on God's terms. We experience godliness through Tam V'das in the things that make total sense to us. That's on Zah, level of Zah. And then there's an in-between level that is beyond us, but not completely beyond us. If you remember before when he spoke about that Bina cannot change Midas, the nature of Midas. Chachma can change the nature. So he spoke about two types of miracles. Miracles that are concealed in nature and miracles that suspend nature. And he said that's the difference. There are miracles that work through nature because we need to elevate the world as it is. We can't just suspend and defy the laws of nature that God put into place. That's why we say Havayu Hu Elikim. The operative pasuk that we've been learning for a while. I mean, it's been a while since he mentions it, but so the point is that when you understand now that Arich Ampin does the concealment from us of this deeper, of this higher level of Chachmas Tamar that's completely off limits, what he calls Heskem, God's determination, period. Like we say, Gzeira Gezarti, Chuka Chakakti. This is what God desired. This is what God desired. That's all we know. But that concealment is only from us, not from Arich Ampin. That's what he said right now, and this is before the parentheses. I'm explaining why is that significant and why we need to know that. That's my explanation I just gave to help understand it a bit. Okay. If anybody wants to ask anything, please do. If not, I will continue reading the parentheses and make our way through this section. As I said, this is literally word for word from the Tzemach Tzedek. which made it a little easier. When I looked at it there, you could see how it's a few different words are a little, add a word here, a word there. That's different, that helps understand.
In Eratero,
Yeah, you want to look it up? I could tell you what page it's on if you want. As a matter of fact, I do actually want to see it. 1 second, let me bring it here. 1 minute, please. Yeah, Suneda Teda Tetzava, pages Aleph Tavshin Chaf Aleph, which would be 1721. So he says there, just want to see the exact lashon. Oh, that's what I said. Because here the language was avaloisha helem legabe arecham in atzmei. So the language is a little in the Tzemach Tzedek. The language is aval eina helem legabe arecham in atzmei. He says avaloisha helem legabe arecham atzmei. There it says aval eina helem legabe. The Rebbe Rashab for some reason changed ein to loy. Ein seems easier to read. I'm not obviously asking any question that Rebbe Rashab knows what he's doing, but that's the language there. Aval ein helem legabe arecham. Okay. And you could also see how the idea develops from the Maimer of the Alter Rebbe, as the Mittler Rebbe wrote it down. That Tzemach Tzedek further elaborates on it, and the Rebbe Rashab is now bringing it into a final picture. I should also add there's a Maimer from the Rebbe Marash on it as well. So this is a sugya that is existent in Chassidus. Many haven't learned it, so we're learning it here. Okay. So now the parentheses. 3 lines on the bottom of page 1239. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. So he says, "Va'ayim mashin is barli il dibra maskal atem nitzovim ha'alef." Rebbe Rashab is referring us to a Maimon that was earlier. Below they say that's in volume 1, page 123. It's a long while back, very early on in the Hemshech, page 123. And what does it say there? So I'll explain it, because now he's suddenly going to throw in the level of ak, Adam Kadm. It says the ak hu b'chinas Heskem v'achlote. There he explained in the Seder Shtalshlus, in the order of the cosmic order, after the Kav, the first so-called world or domain is called Adam Kadm, the primordial man. It's not yet considered an olam like Atzilus or Bria Yetzirah Asiyah. It's considered more of the Alter Rebbe brings that the Magid would call it Kloli, somewhat like a blueprint. Ak, when we say, for example, that everything in Hashgacha Pratis, even when a leaf turns over, it's all there, machshava gduma da ak. That's an expression used in the primordial thought of ak. Ak is considered the world where it has a bird's eye view and a snapshot of all of existence. So you can't call it a structured world as in Eris and Kalim. Some places it says ak doesn't have Kalim yet. Sometimes it says it's Shadish Kalim, Shadish Neshamas, there's the Shadish and Neshamas. Bottom line is, it's not yet a fully shaped. It's the way God is envisioning existence, but after the Tzimtzum. Before the Tzimtzum, it's God envisioning existence completely on divine terms. There's no Tzimtzum yet. There's no Kav. Ak is already an existent entity and considered like the blueprint. So one of the things he said back in that Maimer, what Ak is like the Heskem v'achlote. That's God's determination and resolve or resolution to create the world. Now, you'll say, 1 second, didn't he resolve that in where you say Ratzon Hamuchlat, or you say the Heskem and Ratzon before the Tzimtzum? But before the tzimtzum, it's still completely within the divine, and without the tzimtzum, nothing can exist. After the tzimtzum, Ak plays the role of being like the interface where the divine energy is very intense, but it's now laying out the actual blueprint for existence. Before the tzimtzum, it's still in God's envisioning. And here, it's actually a reality, not reality, a physical reality, but a spiritual reality. And he called it Heskem b'achlot. Now, the Rebbe Rashab, in his thoroughness, is bringing that, because here we're talking Heskem b'achlot and the level of Ratzon HaTacht and Ratzon HaElyon, which is Atik and Arich, or like he called it, Choch Mistimor Radla. So he says there, it talks about Ak, and he wants to show that there too, he says, V'gam Sham Kainhu, Shezeh L'mayla B'chinas Gili Haratzon. There too, the explanation is that it's not yet a state of Gili Haratzon. What he means by that is, like he said here, if you look earlier, he said that in the lower level of the Tam Komos, I'm just want to see the actual lesson. Tam Komos. So there's no Gili that we can talk about that we say is revealed to us. All you know is that he determined to do so. On the lower level, there's some form of Gili, but on the higher level, there's no Gili. So he's saying the same thing when we discussed about Ak. We also said the same. There also was explained that Ak is the determination, but there's no actual Gili till the lower levels of the world. So he's making a comparison between the Heskem Achlota of Ak that was discussed back then and what we're discussing here. That's what this parenthesis is coming to add. Now, why is it important to emphasize? Well, first of all, the Rebbe Rashab is being thorough. And just in case you remember about Heskem B'achlot and Ak, and you say maybe there is a Gilui, you say, no, the same thing I just said here is also applies there, that there's no Gilui. Gilui compared to the Makablim. We're not talking about compared to Arich Ampin. 1 second. Yeah. And the second thing I would say is because Ak is sometimes called the Rotzen Kloli for Ishtalshlus. So even though we said this about Atik and Arich, Keser is Rotzen, but sometimes Ak is called the Keser Kloli, the general desire for everything. Now, it's not a contradiction because, as I pointed out, just take an example, building a home. There's more than one desire here. There's the general desire that you want a home. Then there's the desire for the specifics of the home. And at each level, there's a keser, as we discussed a number of times. So the keser kloli is, I want all of existence. There's the rotzen before the tzimtzum. We're not talking about that now. In Ak is the rotzen, I want existence. Now that rotzen is a very makif, it's a big makif, it's a very surrounding, transcendent state. But then from there will come the ksarim for the specifics. So when you think of it that way, it could be he's bringing Ak because he wants to broaden the picture that we're talking about. There's a level of Ratzon that's just, I want. Then there's a level of Ratzon that starts revealing what I want. Like we spoke about, that the person who wants the home has a certain inner reason why he wants this home. The architects and the contractors and the workers may never know that reason. It's completely within him. There could be a tam komus, a reason that they could find out, but they don't know right now. But there could be something that only the owner of the house or or the originator of the plan or the builder, not something that is not even relevant for them to know. All they know is that they were commissioned to build a house. A melech says, the king decrees, I want to have a palace, a mansion. He calls in all his top people, architects and designers and so on, and tells them, that's what I want. Why do you want it? He could tell them different reasons, but there's also the ultimate in his deepest part of his heart and soul that only he knows. Not because he's keeping it secret, because it's on his level, it's not on their level. So there's a level where they could know some of it, some of the reasoning behind it. Why do I want a mansion? I want one for my a summer palace, so I can go with my family on vacation. So there's a reason for it. That reason will dictate what kind of home it will be. That's already Chachma Bina Das on the conscious level, the actual building of it. But on the Ratzon level, there's the Ratzon. It could be the Ratzon that you know some of the reason, or you know there's a reason that you don't yet know what it is, and there's a level that's completely concealed. Only the melech, like we say sometimes, I don't want to say the expression shashua melech batzmusei, but it's like a rotzen, not even a tam komus, a heskem. So in that context, he's saying clearly that the helam that is completely concealed is only from the recipients. Arich in itself, there's no helam, because there you have the rotzen etzema rotzen that's higher than the rotzen of that's through the tam komus l'rotzen, that's connected to a reason. So basically, you could say that the building of this home could have a reason that, let's call it, is accessible, or at some point will be accessible, and then there could be something that will never be accessible, remains completely in the domain of the creator himself. So therefore, when he talks about ak, he says there too, it's l'maylam b'chinas gili haratzen, meaning the ratzon that already has a tam komus. There's something there in the hachlota of ak that's beyond revelation, essentially. That's what he adds in this parentheses. Now he's going to continue the language. This is still the Tzemach Tzedek's language. He's going to make now an interesting comparison. But before I read, let me just go back to something to understand what he's going to say. Remember that this whole piece was speaking in Ratzon Ha'elyon, the Ratzon that's officially beyond reason. That even there's a level that relates to reason, and there's a level that's completely beyond reason. The Heskem that we just discussed. Now, what about Ratzon HaTachton? Remember Ratzon HaTachton, he compared that, that was Zoh. That in Zoh, in the Midas, in the conscious, not superconscious. Now we're talking about superconscious. In the conscious, there was also, Zoh had a Ratzon, a desire, but it also has a Ratzon with a Ratzon radiating, the reasoning is there. Like we said, during davening, you're contemplating on the greatness of God, and that's causing a desire, and in turn, an emotional stimulation, and you're all passionate about connecting to godliness, as he explained on page 1238. Or in 1237, he said it more in these words. There's a state where the Meir Boya Eira Seichel B'chinas Ratzon Pnimi Shechefetz U'Mishtekek Ba'Dover Mipnei HaSeichel, and has a lot of vitality. Then there's the stage afterwards where the reasoning recedes or is forgotten, or after davening, when that is bonus stops. But then what's left is the Reishim, a strong determination that remains. So committed you are, completely committed. So now he's going to compare, is the Heskem that Arich Ampin, he said, the Heskem, which means that determination is not concealed. The reasoning behind it is not so concealed from Arich Ampin. How is it compared? Is it similar to Zoh? So he says no. And this is what he's going to say now. The Ein Zeh K'moi B'Zoh. Again, this is literally word for word from this Eira Teda that I was quoting. The Ein Zeh K'moi B'Zoh. This is not the same way it's in Zoh. The Sham Usha Heskem U'Helam Gam L'Gabe B'Chinas Zoh. There, the concealment is also in context of Zoh. It's not just a concealment for lower levels. The level of the midas themselves and the Ratzon within them, once the contemplation and the Seichel is concealed, it's concealed from the midas. That's why the midas still have that rough edge that we spoke about, severities and judgments. Because as we discussed earlier, the Meichin receded or left, so to speak, expired, and the only thing was left was the determination. Next page 1240. You can't say that in Arich Ampin. You can't say that when the Meichin is not there, when it's not so revealed, it's as it's concealed from Arich Ampin. Why? I know, I'll explain what that means in a minute. Because if you remember, when he spoke about Loi Odom Hu, I'm just going back. Okay. So this needs explanation. This is again from the Tzemach Tzedek. I want to just see if Tzemach Tzedek explains it. No. Yeah. Okay, I need another introduction here, another explanation to understand what this means. In general, one of the reasons Chassidus brings, one of the reasons we have Eir Ein Sof. Why could God not create the universe? He doesn't need Eir. And the explanation is that, of course, he could, but to make it make sense to us, Eir helps us understand that God is not affected by the creation. When you go and build something, even a small thing or a big thing, you're going to exert yourself. And there's going to be a change. You're going to get weaker and tired because we're human beings. We invest our energy in something, we get tired from it. It wears us down. Yes, we can recharge, but we're subject to these changes. By the Eibishter, it says, Ani Hashem lo shanisi. Chassidus and Kabbalah take that very literally. There's no such thing as shinui in godliness. So then the question is, what does it mean? How can then you say before the world was created and after the world was created, there's a shinui? Before Breishis Bara Elokim, there was no world. After Breishis Bara Elokim, there is a world. Okay, let's say there's no before because time itself is created. But still, is there no difference? So one of the answers that Kabbalah and Chassidus give is that the differences happen in the level of Oyer, not in the level of the Etzem. So in other words, since Oyer does not impact the source, in other words, whatever you do with light, let's say sunlight, the sun doesn't change because of sunlight, whether the sun shines or not shines. If you take the sunlight in some way, you bottle it or you use it to warm your house, the sun is not affected by it. It's not mispolled from it. So one of the reasons that Oyer is used, because Oyer is a perfect example of God is being mashpia, he is creating through Oyer, but the Oyer does not impact him. That's one of the explanations. Now again, this is meant to try to help us understand it as best as possible. So then the question is, however, we know there's the concept of, let's say, Yehi Rotzin. Somebody, God forbid, is sick. You make a Misha Berach and you want God to change his gezerah, his mind, to heal the person. So we see there's the concept of shinuyim going on throughout Hishtalshlus and throughout even Aveda. We say, you do a mitzvah, you give God nachas ruach. Rahman al-Itzlan, you do the opposite, you cause God to be upset. However, we explain nachas ruach and upset. Obviously, it's all metaphorical. But still, we know that it says nachas ruach lefanev v'amata shenasa shenasa d'seinu. So the way Chassidus explains it is that all these nachas and all these, what we call shinuyim, are happening in the levels of the Eris and Kalim of Atzilus, but not on the levels that are higher than Atzilus. Actually, the Alter Rebbe really says it almost explicitly in Tanya chapter 2, which I just finished teaching a few weeks ago, or last week. And several places in Tanya, in Perik Memches, in Shayach Damuna, he says that when it talks about who, the Rambam says, who amada, who yidei, who yidur, that God is one with his knowledge. The Maharal asks the question, what do you mean? God is beyond knowledge. How could you associate Yediyah to Elokus? So Chassidus is metavich, like he brings there in Haggadah, the Arizal, that it's talking about not Atzilus. There's a Yisachdus between Das, who amada, who Yedei, Yedu, and Eres v'Kelim of Atzilus. But higher than Atzilus, he says there, God is beyond Das. So essentially, Chassidus explains, you may have heard the expression that does God know, or Yedeya or Yedua? There's a difference between Yedua, it's known to him, and Yedeya means he knows. So when the pasuk, for example, in Chumash says in Vayera, that when the Sodom was wicked, there's a pasuk that's a very strange pasuk. Chassidus has whole maimorim just on this verse. Alter Rebbe and many other maimorim. It says, Erdano. God says, let us go down and see the cry from Sodom. Hiktsaz Kosa. What does it mean he's going down? Where was God before he went down? But he's not aware that in Sodom there's crimes. God has to come down. You could say a human being maybe is up on let's say, on the top of a mountain, and he sees something happening down below. He has to go down to find out what's going on. But the Eibishter has to come down. In a way, you could ask the same question of Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai. What does it mean Vayered? Where was he before he came down? And God goes through such changes. So this is a whole Arichus and Chassidus based on Kabbalah, that this is referring to the Esser spheres of Atzilus. That there's two ways to know the events of this world. Yes, God, of course, Yedua. It's known to him. He has a bird's eye view of everything. He can see everything. But does he see it the way we see it? Is he feel our pain the way we feel our pain? When we say, Imay Anechi B'Tzara, is God also see it, so to speak, through our lens? So the Pasuk is saying, Erdano, that God is saying, yes, of course he knows. And of course he would act on it. But he wanted to show, I'm coming down, so to speak, not Begashmis, that the Elokus is able to manifest in Eris and Kalim and see things through the lens, so to speak, of existence. No, that's why we say Das Elyon, Das Tachten. God is not just Das Elyon, he also has Das Tachten. We learned Kael Deus Havaya, that in Havaya there's two Deus, meaning God could also see it that way. That's why we daven and we say, when it says in the V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shvuscha, next week's Parsha, 2 weeks from now, the Tzovim. So the Gemara says, what means V'shav Hashem Elokecha Shvuscha? That the God will also return with the returnees. So the Gemara says, Golu le'edem shchineman, or before that, Golu le'modai, Golu le'bovel. That when the Jews went into exile, the Shechina was there with them. What does that mean? What do you mean the Shechina is there with them? What would be the conceit? He was not there with them. No, he's there with them in Golus. Not just that God is with us and he remains completely detached. That there's some way that godliness identifies with the creation he created. Now, obviously, that's not defining God. He also has the higher perspective. And God always remains beyond it all. But it means that God is not just, as the Goyim would say, as some philosopher said, Rama kol Goyim Hashem, Ozav Hashem. He's too high to be involved in our petty and pedestrian and menial activities. In the name of greatness, God belongs down this earth. Shamayim Shamayim LaHashem, Oris Nisn Livnei Adam. You could say God belongs in the spiritual higher worlds. What's he doing here? The Malachim said, why are you giving the Torah down to inferior human beings? Give us the Torah. But that's the whole Chiddush of Torah and Yiddishkeit. No, God is not Leba Shamayim he. He gave the Torah down to earth, and he comes down to earth. When I say comes, not in a physical way, it means there's godliness that manifests also on our terms. It would be very easy to point out God created a world. He remains completely aloof and detached. And there's never a relationship even. We're just subjects, like I pointed out a number of times. We're like servants. You're serving God. It's a gift to you that you could have a relationship with God. But that's not how the Torah says. The Torah says, "V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha v'yadaita," have a relationship with me. Shutef l'kodesh yom chasen nosei zemat Torah. What does that mean? That God is the chasen and we're the bride, a groom and a bride. And there's all kinds of relationships that are not just shalei ba'erech, that God is completely a boira and we're a nivra. We find godliness manifesting av and ben, avinu malkeinu. A father is not just a melech. A father means there's a relationship. Now, obviously, it's not physical, but it's compared to that we also have something close. Like he says in chapter 2 in Tanya, that every neshama is like from like the ben memoyach ha'av. Bonim atem l'Hashem Elokechem b'nei b'chei Yisrael, that we are like a ben. Anyway, I don't want to go elaborate more on that. I just wanted to give enough to understand. So based on that, we still say Anei Hashem le'shanisi. Why le'shanisi? You just said Golo le'edem. He's with us in Golus. That's a shinui. Before he wasn't in Golus, now he is in Golus. Before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, Eibishter was above, and now he's within. The answer is no, there's a part that remains always Anei Hashem le'shanisi. Even when the Elokus, so to speak, goes into Golus with us, that's a level of Elokus that's l'fi erech ha'ilms. So that's what he's saying. To say in Zah, you could say Zah is Eris and Kalim of the structure of existence. So there you could say there's a Helam that Zah itself is not experiencing the intense godliness of that was there when the Moichin was radiating. But in Arich is higher than Atzilus. Arich Hampen is more a reflection of Ratzon Hashem. The Ratzon Hashem, you can't say there's a shinui from one Ratzon to another. So on the level of Arich Hampen, you have to say that the Heskem is that there is no concealment. That there is no concealment and a change between when the Moichen radiate or when the Moichen don't radiate. So Arich Hampen always has some element of Gilui of. So he says that's what he says. So in Shechina, what is the concealment then? We're talking about the Ratzon Elyon, the Gabi Makablim, the Esesphiris and the Makablim. We don't know the reason, the real reason that Shtei Kachola b'Machshava. V'zeu Dafke b'Bchinis Hapnimi is the Arich Hampen. And this level where Arich Hampen does have an awareness is Dafke the Pnimius of Arich Hampen, the B'chinis B'chinis Helam L'Gaba Hanatzalim. This level is Helam L'Gaba Hanatzalim. Remember, Pnimius of Arich Hampen, not the Chitzenius. Because the Chitzenius is already a tam komas that we do have, so Pnimius Arich Hampen, but the which is completely concealed in a state of Helam L'Gaba and Atzalim, the emanations, it's concealed from them. But in Arich Hampen itself, the concealment is only compared to the lower levels. Arich Hampen itself, it does irradiate Begili. Now, I'm not clear 100% how Arich and Atik work here. But it seems to me that what he's saying now is that Arich has two levels. The Pnimius of Arich Hampen, which is like the Heskem, but there the Gilui is there because Arich Hampen is on a higher level. And then there's the Tam Komos, the lower level in Arich Hampen, where we do have some access to. That's what it sounds like he's saying, and not just sounds like it, he's almost saying this explicitly, but I would still wait because there's more to be developed. But the main thing I wanted to explain was this difference. Now, I know I gave a long explanation because it's impossible to understand this on your own if you don't have the explanation. What's this Ani Hashem Le'Shanisi suddenly? But I see that Tzemach Tzedek says exactly this. That's the lashon from the Tzemach Tzedek, but he also doesn't elaborate. So I just used explanations from other places in Chassidus to understand this point here. This is a pretty comprehensive picture of how these levels work. Okay, so obviously I'll stop now. If anybody wants to ask anything, we'll clarify anything. I hope my explanation was clear. And I think I explained it well, but you have to tell me if I need to explain it further. Such silence. Wow. Okay. I thought there'd be a lot of questions on this, but
Shtei Kach Ola b'Machshava is not like in Zoh.
I love you.
No. The Shtei Kach Ola Machshava, he used only Ratzon Elyon. Zoh is more within our conscious Ratzon that's based on Tam V'das. There's a level where the Tam V'das is radiating, or the level where, like after davening, these bonus. Ratzon Elyon, the Shtei only goes when you're dealing with Das Elyon, you're dealing with the Ratzon Elyon, things that are on higher levels, yeah. It still needs plenty of explanation because it's so dense. And I see the Rebbe Rashab is not elaborating completely on everything here, but that's why I'm stopping if anybody wants to ask anything. There's still more to come. And I know I did say, let's wait till we finish it before. So that's fair. So we don't need to, we'll go back on, I'm going to go over this a number of times. Trust me. You know, this needs to be reviewed quite a few times to really get the whole picture here.
It also looks like Atik and Arich on the same category here because he said that even Ak is in that category, which is higher than Atik.
Yeah, as I said, initially I thought he was talking about different, but it's clearly, he says, Beis Madreges b'Chachmas Tima, and he never says, he just says that the higher level is called Chachmas Tima Ilah Da'atika. He does say that. But it's very clear he brings together Chachmas Tima v'Radla. So I think it's very negate to the Zohar, because the Zohar did say Mitzchad is gale ba'atika kadisha rotzen ikre. So the metzach of Atik is called rotzen. By the way, remember the Zohar in the top of page 1237, I said I'd look up the translation. So on the third line, he said, the lo yisyada, poshit chaturna b'simaya. So I saw three different interpretations of what the word turna means. The commentaries that are not Chabad Chassidus teach turna from the word what's the word? Shofit. Shalit. From the word shlita. The Tzemach Tzedek teaches the word turna from the Mittler Rebbe teaches the word turna from the word shliach. And I see now that in one of the Mefarshei Zohar that's brought by the Mittler Rebbe elsewhere, he teaches turna from the word tachshit. Like a tachshit is a precious, like jewelry. Because it fits, because he says b'sima ya. I know I'm going back there, suddenly jumped there, but I was looking at it, I just remember. So we'll get back to that because he's going to explain the Zohar. So what I just said was really more for myself, or those of you that got what I said, fine. If not, I'll get back to it. Okay.
Well, you said the Rabbi Jacobson, Erich Apim ain't shayach lomer kach ani harvai lo shnisi. I know you explained it, but is that panemius Arich Apim or chitzonius, or I'm not exactly sure about lo shnisi ish part. Could you reveal that again?
Yeah. Well, it appears that there's two levels in Arich Apim: the panemius chachmas tema and chitzonius chachmas tema. Okay, they're both superconscious. One is, however, a tam komus and has midas in it and has seichel, but it's concealed from us. It's like the root of our conscious intellect and the root of our conscious emotions in the superconscious. That's the lower level of Arich Apim. That there is some relationship there. The panemius of Arich Apim, which clearly is connected to Radla and Atik, is what's called Heskem. We have no inkling at all of what is going on there. As a matter of fact, it defies our logic. That's where shtik kachala b'machshava. But in Arich itself, you can't say it's concealed. It's only concealed from us. In Arich, you have to say it's revealed. In contrast to Zah, that can go through a change before you while you're contemplating and after the contemplation goes away. So in Arich, he's saying there's never a concealment. It always remains revealed there. Now, first I was thinking maybe it means that the lower level of Arich has some relationship with the higher level of Arich. Now I'm not so sure, to be honest. But regarding your question, basically Arich Apim itself, like he says, Meir ha'er begili. Even though, from our point of view, Chachma v'Atzilus, like Moshe Rabbeinu, we cannot in any way, Moshe is saying, Zu Torah v'Zu Schara. It completely defies logic that God should have any reason and pleasure from such barbaric killing of Rabbi Kiva. But in Arich, there's clearly, it's not a Helam compared to Arich. What's not clear is the lower level of Arich has access to it or not. First I said yes, now I'm not 100% sure.
You're talking about midas, the Arich.
Yeah, do the midas and Arich and tam komus of Arich have some opening to the shtik? Now I'm reading it, I think not, but I can't say for sure. I mean, logically you'd say yes, but it's, first that's how I was thinking initially. Let me go back a moment and read it again. Okay. Yeah, the Heskem is Milim. Yeah, you can't. There's nothing conclusive about that question, the lower level of Arich and the higher. He just says that in Arich it radiates, in that which is below Arich, which is the Mekablim and the Esespheres Netzolim, the emanations, it doesn't. And all we have is determination. And that's unlike Zoh. I think they'll get more clarity as he starts to tie this together in understanding the Zohar. But this is dense stuff, and it's not usual Chassidus you learn, because it's talking very much like in the engine room of how. That's why I gave the whole elaboration of Elikus beyond existence, Elikus within existence. This is part of the deepest parts of Chassidus, where how do we reconcile a God that's completely beyond us, and at the same time manifests within our existence and our lives. And it's fascinating, obviously, because when you say Havayu Elikim, you're essentially saying the Havaya that's beyond is one with the Havaya that's within. Like we learned, Havayu Elikim, B'Shamayim B'Ma'aretz Metachas, the godliness within existence. Havayu Elikim, the godliness beyond existence. And we still have Einoid, and we always have a level where there's a God, the higher level that joins them together. So it's very profound, very eloquent as well, because we're looking, as I said, it would be a lot simpler to just simply say God is there, we're here, and we have one branch that connects us. It's called doing mitzvahs and learning Torah. That would be very nice. But there's a mitzvah liyachid, yizbar, liyachdei, achdus Hashem, Hashem echad, we say. We want to understand godliness within us, not just beyond us. So, Spinoza, pantheism, God is nature, nature is God. Then there are philosophies that says God is beyond nature, but he's not part of nature. God is completely beyond. And we want to have the best of both worlds. A God that is one with us, but also a God that's beyond us. And that they both come together. So you could imagine why this is quite a journey. And that's why you have to go step by step. First, you identify and relate to the godliness that relates to you. Like we said, Hu chayecha, God sustains you. Like in the morning when we say Birchas HaShachar, by the time you come to Shemoneh Esrei, you should be relating to God on God's terms. And it's climbing a ladder. And I think we all have to find that place. There are times where we experience God very much when you thank Hashem for the brachas he gives you, health, life, parnosa, Birchas HaShachar. We say, Pokeyach Ivrim, Mal B'Sharumim, Moidani Lefanecha before that. And then we start appreciating a godliness that's beyond providing for us. And as we climb, that's really where we're going here. Mutfa, Murgish, Muskel. And now he's going to levels that are even beyond our logic itself. When a person has that Amunah B'tochen, and they see a tragedy happen, and they accept it, even though they're crying and in terrible pain, that is a tremendous level of b'tochen that connects a person to God. Now, no one should ever know of something like that. We're talking about after the fact. But it is, at the end of the day, we talk about it in terms of a person can go through such an experience, let's say like a Sari Aruge Malchus. And people have gone through this in their personal lives, real tragedies, terrible tragedies, losses. And that connection is not on our terms. It's very clear. Like I always say, whenever I talk to people who've gone through that fire, I say, you have a relationship with God that no one else has. It's a sacred connection that you and God have in a way that is not rational, because everything rational defies the very, losses and tragedies of that nature. So it's a very sacred experience. And again, nobody should know of it. Aaron HaKohen, when he lost his two sons, Nadav and Avihu, by Yudem Aaron, as we spoke about. These are experiences that, again, no one should know of it. But when a person goes through that, it's like going into the Holy of Holies, where you're experiencing God completely beyond the rationale and the logic of existence. Why should a good person suffer? This is the place we go to when we talk to Holocaust survivors and people who really lost terrible, terrible losses and tremendous. But this is how Chassidus addresses it. We're not afraid to talk about it, but we don't talk about it. We're trying to explain it away or rationalize it, which would be very obscene, actually. That's really minimizing and almost like trivializing it. It's an acceptance of something, God decreed, and that's that. So though he's not talking here per se about tragedy, but he brings that in because that's the ultimate example of completely something defying logic. What else defies logic more than a good person suffering and a holy man dying like Rabbi Akiva did, etc. So that's some of the conclusions here, but it's talked about here very haskaladik, Zah, Arich, Steik, But if you really think about it, that's what we're talking about, how different relationships with God. Now, the other extreme is where God blesses you and you feel blessings all the time. And you say, wow, and we know we're not perfect, and still God gives us all the blessings. So that's the other extreme where you see God working for you and it makes sense and then you're enjoying it. And obviously we all want that. We're going to the new year. You want to have brachas like that, without all these nisyonos and challenges. But the Rebbe Rashab is covering the whole spectrum. And, the goal really is to have a relationship with God that's beyond everything without a tragedy. We don't need to have this type of an assign to come to realize that God is completely beyond us. But anyway, just a few more words on this topic.
So, Rabbi Jacobson, according to that, if you said that Chitzonis Arachampim might not be able to access Panemius Arachampim, wouldn't that then necessitate or reveal that we can only climb up that ladder that we've been climbing up from the Olam Hasiya Gashmi all the way up? We get finally to that level of Chitzonis Arachampim and we can't go any farther if they can't have access to it? So
I have two answers to that question. That's why I was suggesting that it's not the case. That Chitzonis Arachampim, because it's Arich, it now has at least a doorway into Pnimius Arachampim. So Chachma, Geluya doesn't have. That's why he doesn't. I didn't say it's not the case. I just said it's not conclusive here. It could very well be that is the case, and I would lean towards saying that it is, because exactly this reason. But remember another thing: there's always going to be a point where you have to say Atzmus is beyond me, and even remember that's also a relationship. When you, it's like I'll just use an example. I was once dealing with a couple, and they were very fine people, but they had a lot of both smart and very talented, and they had a lot of run-ins. But they were also very deep. So they understood, with Seichel. So I said to them, look, you have different, ein day saying Shabbos. Two people are never going to have the same opinions. But if you know that your etzem is connected to each other's etzem, there's a certain element of recognizing and actually celebrating the mystery of your spouse. It's not just what you know. There are things we are in common. We think alike, we feel alike, we have family that's in common, we have similar interests, we both love the Rebbe, we like shlichus, whatever, that is the relationship that is a certain commonality. But there's also an element of a mystique that the other person has, simply because their neshama is coming from a place, not because it's a secret or because you're not able to access, because fundamentally there are levels in a soul that can never be communicated completely. And if you can embrace that, so I remember the woman says to me, does that mean I have a relationship with it? I said, exactly right. That's what Chassidus says. When you recognize, when Moshe was told by Hashem, you can't see me and live, that wasn't a rejection. He was actually revealing to Moshe that if you see all of me and you think you have a relationship with me, that's not real. Because there's a part of me you can never see. And as soon as you know that, that alone deepens the relationship. So relationships don't always have to be that I get it, or I own it, or I contain it, or I understand it. The mere fact that you can say that the Eibush is beyond does not mean, that's not meant to distance us. It's meant to be real. Because he is beyond. Now, let's say the Eibush wanted to make us feel good. You could connect to me all the way. But then you find out one day, 1 second, God only gave us 5% of himself, and that's what we connect with. He never told us there's the other 95%. I'm just using that number as an example. Then you find, so in other words, you really never have a relationship with the other 95% because it was never told to you. When, on the other hand, if Hashem says, I am going to let you know that there are parts of me that you will never understand. That is a kiruv, not a richuk, if you get what I'm saying. Because that alone is the reality. That now you can now you can say, okay, it's a part of Hashem. My mind may not understand, but there are other ways I can connect with it. Kabbalah Seil, Mesiras Nefesh, whatever it may be. So that's my second part of the answer to this question. But it's a vital discussion, no question. Because at the end of the day, there really is no ceiling. But remember, no ceiling does not mean it's always going to be on our terms. Having a relationship with God is also, you want God's terms. And there's nothing wrong. You surrender. The idea of Kabbalah Seil and surrender is not weakness. It's strength. It's recognizing there's a reality greater than I am, and I'm embracing it by my accepting it, even if I don't fully understand it. That needs to be appreciated. But remember, it's not just that. There's also the Elokus that we do relate to. And here's where the real twist is. It's one God. So the God that we relate to, within it is embedded the God that's beyond us, godliness that's beyond. And the godliness that's beyond us has within it also the godliness that relates to us. That's why, if you remember in volume 2, when he was speaking about how can a post-symptom consciousness experience pre-symptom reality, that's what he said. Because the pre-symptom reality also has embedded in it the post-symptom existence. And the post-symptom, and the whole purpose of the symptom is b'shvil hagilui. And the gilui is b'shvil ha-symptom. In other words, everything is encompassed with everything. That's where it really becomes very powerful. So even the highest levels of Ein Sof that are inaccessible, ultimately their goal is that we should some way be able to relate to it. But the only way you can relate to it is not by saying, oh, it's on my terms. Sometimes it requires surrendering to it or accepting a higher end, like being in awe of it. Remember, if it's always on our terms, you'll never have the awe. It'll always be, oh, you know what, I own it, I contain it. The idea of us being able to so-called suspend all our faculties and stand in awe of something greater is actually the greatest experience possible, because it's not totally on your terms. At the same time, you want it to be internalized. You see, it's a constant dance. That's the bottom line. The beauty of it is that you come to a point where you realize that number one, that the paradox is completely normal, and we shouldn't be afraid of paradoxes, but even deeper, that God is beyond paradoxes. At some point, as contradictory as all this sounds, you come to a point where you realize that true reality and true unity is, there are no contradictions, because everything comes together. You can have a godliness relating to us while being a godliness beyond us, but that it forces us to get out of our regular rational mode to get there. And it doesn't become irrational. You just connect to something that's deeper than rational. You know, love is not irrational. Love is super irrational. I think that's a critical point. And I know we've talked about this a number of times. Eliezer, I've always told you, the key is we want things that we should be able to contain. That's beautiful. But as soon as you trap yourself there, as soon as you limit yourself there, you get trapped. Only the things that you'll get on your terms. You will never get things that are beyond your terms. And that's really the combination. And it has to be a dance. It has to be, you climb a rung, and then you go to the next rung. You can't just jump to one to the other. You can't just jump into Atzmos and just be absorbed by the total Ein Sof. We'd be annihilated by that. That's why there's a tzimtzum. There's first you learn Aleph Beis, and then Ben Chamesh Lemikra, and Ben Eser Lemishnah, Ben Chamesh Eser Legemara. Like exactly like we're learning. Mudva, Murgish, Muskel. Your mind develops and grows further. You're challenged. What yesterday you understood, you realize, 1 second, I don't really get it. Then you come to a higher understanding, and the things you understood yesterday become more internalized, and then you see broader horizons. That's the journey. And as we all love retirement, but remember, Talmidei Chacham and Tzaddikim ein lehem menucha, lei b'olam hazeh v'lei b'olam haba. I know it sounds very depressing to some. It means I'll never have menucha. I want some peace. So the Rebbe explains, the Chassidus explains, ein lehem menucha does not mean anxiety and all that comes, a restlessness that's unhealthy. Ein lehem menucha means you're always going to see more higher horizons. So your angst will always want to grow. So it's not the ein lehem menucha of that you're going to have worries, tension, stress, and anxiety. That's not the Ein Lemanuch. The Ein Lemanuch here is a Kedusha. Imagine always being able to climb, no matter where you are, you always see there's more. And that, when you embrace that, you really are embracing the true nature of what life is about.
You're like an eternal Ayin Beis Shiur.
Yeah, exactly. Trust me. And look, I'll tell you this. Of course, I'd love to think this all should come to a conclusion. It's very clear. I have that desire too. But I really do embrace the mystery here. And as we're learning this, you see it's like you're barely holding on. I mean, I'm trying to do my best explaining it, but I'll be very honest. A lot of this is very, very subtle and very high levels. This understand, Yeshanisi, Zah, then you start, Zah is a pretty high level, Zah of Atzilus. It happens to be a world of Elikus. And still, there's a concealment in Zah. I mean, it's a pretty heavy duty.
Yeah, beautiful. But doesn't the mere fact that we can talk about and try to understand through like an Ayin Beis, or Ein Sof Lifnit Simsum, Eser Seres Aganuzos Lifnit Simsum, Ayin, what was it? Ayin Atzmus, Ayin Matzil, these levels. The fact that the Rebbe can bring these down and we can discuss it, doesn't that mean that we have to, logically speaking, I guess, logically, that means that there is a way up from Chitzonis Arich Ampim to this to the higher levels of Pinimis Atik and so on.
Absolutely. The question is how much you have to strip yourself and how much you can enter. In other words, how much bittul is needed and how much can you relate to it. Of course, there's a relationship. There's always a relationship. The question is, you see what I'm saying? How much logic is there and how much of it is Kabbalah cell? Like, a certain sense. Look, a lot of what I'm saying here is coming from a sense, not necessarily I understand exactly what Arich Ampin is. It's, you get a sense like through your shlila. You say, you know what? There are things I know, there are things I don't know, there are things I don't know, you come to sense higher levels of truth. I mean, this happened all the time. I remember many times listening to the Rebbe. First you think you got it, then you realize you didn't get it. Then you come to think you did get it on a higher level. Then again, you didn't get it. And then I sometimes learn something 30, 40 years ago that I read or learned or heard from the Rebbe. And suddenly I feel, 1 second, I don't get it. And it's like, so it's always a process. A relationship that's how a relationship works. There's nothing wrong with saying, I get part of it. Some of it I don't get. I think that's really how intelligent really works. There's always a sense of something. You get a sense, an instinct, a resonance, and you can't always explain it, and then you begin to explain it. I think it's important to state the mind is not the beginning and end of everything. The mind is a tool. It's a great tool. Its ability to rise above subjectivity, to understand ideas and dream and imagine things that we can't relate to right now. The emotions don't have that capacity really. The mind has the ability to dream. We can dream about complete fantasies. And I mean also in Elikus. If we didn't have a mind, we would be far more limited in our experiences. So the mind is a tremendous tool, but it's still a tool. And it's important to understand that Chachma Vatzilus, like right here, Moshe Rabbeinu's Chachmei Elah, he understood so much. And yet when it came to the story of Rabbi Akiva, I don't get it. It totally defies me. This is a very healthy experience because the mind brings you to places where the mind itself tells you to enter the next door, you're going to need other tools. I can't lead you in there because it's not purely logical. You see what I'm saying? So like if we were purely mind, what would happen, God forbid, when a tragedy took place? We would never be able to deal with it because the mind can't fathom it. There has to be ability to cry and be shocked. I remember when the Rebbe said that famous, I mentioned it a number of times, the Shloshim of the Rebbetzin. It's almost, I don't say it's word for word, but the same very similar content. And the Rebbe said then, Pasha Parah Aduma actually, it was Pasha Parah, 30 days after Chavei Shvat. And what did the Rebbe say? He said that when Moshe was shown all the different impurities, the tumas Zav, tumas Nida, tumas Metzera, etc., then God showed him how to purify every impurity. When it came to Tumas Mes, Niskarkam upon of Moshe. Moshe's face became green, yellow, white, however it's interpreted. He became very disturbed. How are you going to purify from this impurity? And that's when Hashem says, Zois, I will show you. Whenever Moshe was perplexed, it always says Zois, because God had to show it to him with his own eyes. And he shows him the Parah Adumah. Okay. The Rebbe asked the question, and I'm now thinking about it. It's Mamish Kamad Dizesis. He says, Moshe was Chachmei Law of Atzilus. He was able to understand things that no one could ever understand. He was able to understand that God takes and God gives. And God gives and God. Just as God takes a life and causes tumas mess, he could also give us a solution, a healing for it, the tara of it. He gave all the other taras of the other impurities. Why was Moshe so disturbed? And the Rebbe said these words, and Moshe knew all of Chassidus, and he knew Yeridat Tzarech Aliyah, and he knew that there's always a deeper element, and the neshama is nitzchi. He goes on, lives on. So why is he so bothered? And the Rebbe basically said, in Yiddish, he said, when the heart is bleeding, the most brilliant mind cannot speak to a bleeding or crying heart. Didn't say those words, but that was the teichen. That the emotions of even a small hefsek, rega cotton, where a body and soul separate, even for 1 second, for Moshe that was completely overwhelming. All the explanations are good, but they cannot explain that which the pain of the disconnect for a moment between godliness and the neshama and his body. You could see the Rebbe was speaking about himself. It was very clear. It was very raw and vulnerable in a way. I remember I was like I was like extremely, I was like shocked almost and taken by the Rebbe speaking so openly about himself. But you think about it, it was the ultimate, that's the ultimate acceptance. It's like, just like when the Rebbe cried the first Basiligani, Tovshin Yud Aleph, after he said, after the Stalkus, after everything we went through, we needed now also this, Yud Shvat, the Stalkus of the Rebbe and so on. And the Rebbe, but then the Rebbe said, but this is what we were given, the job of Der Ashvi, not with our choice, we didn't earn it. That's what it is. You see a certain unwavering, we talk about determination, exactly like that, a netzach, a type of, we accept and we do what we have to do, even though we can't understand it at all. And that's where you really see greatness of all leaders. I mean, Moshe Rabbeinu did it when he was on Mount Sinai, and he's begging for God forgiveness for the Chet Ego. He will not take no for an answer. This type of unwavering determination is not rational. Most rational people say, you know what, I tried, I give up, I'm moving on. Frierdiker Rebbe didn't do that when he was arrested. He didn't do it when he came in a wheelchair in 1940. And the Rebbe didn't do it no matter what we went through, a Holocaust and everything we went through. This is where you see real power. And like the Netzach Yisrael, Lo Yeshaka, the idea that Jews, for thousands of years, everything we went through, it's so easy to have given up and say, you know what? How much torture? How much can we tolerate? The Geula is not here. But that type of commitment is not purely logic. No, logical people at some point say, okay, I always give this example when you hear a story like the doctor's giving up on, say to a mother whose child is autistic, your child will never have a relationship with you. Just impossible. So put your child in a home, pray for him, but don't hope for anything. And then you see a mother will refuse to accept that. So now I'm not saying a miracle happens and suddenly the autism is healed, but you see a connection. I've read stories where mothers connect to their children that the doctors are shocked because there's a neshama. We don't know what's going on. Don't think you have it all figured out. You try your best with your seichel, but you always know there's things that are beyond the pure rational. And those that have that combination. I'm not talking about people who just rely on supernatural or superstitious stuff. I'm talking about a person who uses their mind very well, like a Moshe Chochmei Tzil is the Rebbe, and yet at the same time a certain acceptance in areas where they know I've entered a world which is beyond my ability to understand. But they're equally committed there too.
As you're speaking, Rabbi, and thank you for all this elaboration and elucidation. It actually brings this Kabbalah much more into a tangible understanding. It just comes to mind, and I know this isn't written here. It's not any of the examples you've given, but it sounds a lot like Nasa v'Nishma, which is set in a sense is like one sort of principle benefit. I don't know. It's not like one of
well, it's
like
Nasa v'Nishma is definitely an example of Kabbalah's all, where we accept before we understand. So there's a taste of it. I'm talking higher levels than Nasa v'Nishma. The truth is, but it's in the same realm where the commitment is there, even if it's not logical or rational. But yeah, so generally correct. But there's levels. There's Mesiras Nefesh. There's a lot of levels in that. Nasa v'Nishma was not even due to a tragedy. That was that though, we're accepting the Torah because we accept God, even if we haven't read all the details. We trust we trust God to the extent that just tell me what to do and I'll do it, that type of thing. But yeah, it has a commonality with that. I'll just conclude with this. The Rebbe once said in a Farbrengen that when it comes to faith, Amunah, real Amunah, he said this: a question doesn't make it weaker, and an answer doesn't make it stronger. Interesting expression, huh? In other words, there's certain truths, and I mean, this is what, at the end of the day, debates and logic and rational have their role to play. But there's some truths that if you don't want to accept something, you can rationalize anything away. You can use your mind to find every question and doubt and skepticism. That's why I tell people it's not about proving God exists. It's about ultimately using your mind and coming to realize there are truths that you may not be able to completely, absolutely prove, like a mathematical formula or a chemical formula. That these are not, God is not the product of a human equation. God is a reality that you come to realize. Now, I'm not talking about blindly we're talking about people who've gone through a journey and they've thought about it, Avram Avinu and others, and they really gave it a lot of thought. They come to realize there are truths that are greater than I am. And that is not less real and resonating than a truth that you can empirically see or prove. That's really what it comes down to in talking about it on the broader scale of things. But you need a combination all the time. You need the mind and you need the Chachma that opens you up to Chachma Stima. Like I spoke about last week or something, or 2 weeks ago, that ultimately intelligence is really our tool to experience reality that's greater than ourselves. That's really what Seichel is. Then it comes into what we call Seichel. But we shouldn't worship Seichel as an end in itself. It's experiencing a truth that's greater than you are, meaning greater than your subjective interests, and then integrating that. And Chachma is the door to Arich Ampen. Arich Ampen is the other side of the door, what we're talking about here, behind the curtain. And there are two levels. That's essentially what we're getting to. And we're ultimately going to speak about the zivug of Chachma and Bina, of Abba ve'Ima. They gaze. What is the expression he brought? They gaze. B'mitzcha de Arich Ampen, u'mekabel misham shin ayin neher. So we're going to learn what that gaze is and what are they receiving. So clearly, when the conscious gazes at the superconscious, that's where the bridge is made. But right now, he's still discussing what that superconscious is, the different levels, just putting it into the context.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question. I understand that we cannot tap into that highest level and we can never understand it, and that's only for Hashem. But does that mean that we're not also able to elicit a response, whether it be via action or what we do or what we accomplish, that we can elicit a response from that very illogical and beyond logic place?
Yeah, answer is yes, absolutely. Yes,
and
we
that's
can.
the Etrot Son of Shabbat, right? That's a Mincha of Shabbat. Is that fair to say?
It looks like that's where he's going, but I'd wait to see how he says it specifically, but it sounds like something of that nature. And that's when the severities and judgments become nullified. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I will just qualify one thing you said. Even though we're saying we can never understand it, remember, there's different levels of saying I don't understand something. When a 5-year-old child says I don't know, and a 90-year-old sage and scholar says, I don't know, it's not the same I don't know. In other words, the more you know, the more that I don't know is going to be a lot more richer and higher quality. So just be aware of that. This idea of that only God knows, that's a shtoik, is very different for someone like a Moshe than someone who just doesn't know anything. Not that he knows it more, it's just you appreciate that which you don't know more when you know things, if you know what I'm saying. No pun intended.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we'll stop here, top of page 1240, the end of the paragraph. And what should I say? We're all in it together. We're on Mount Everest somewhere, deep, deep in the dark mountains, as he called it. And we're hanging by a thread, but we're hanging, we're in there, right? I find this fascinating. The part I don't understand, I find more fascinating than the part I do understand.
Right.
To be very honest.
I mean, I think I get a little hint of maybe where that's leading to Ain Ode. I think maybe how we're going to relate to that.
Yeah, it's probably,
Darkness.
yeah. I don't even want to, I don't even want to guess on that, but it's most likely correct. But it's so interesting how he's building it. But I also find amazing to me, when you start looking at the sources, the Rebbe Rashab is literally taking every Maimer Chassidus from the Alter Rebbe all the way to his time and some way integrating it into this picture. I'm blown away by that. Because a lot, when you start looking at the Maimorim, there's a whole Maimorim on this topic, as I said, from the Alter Rebbe and on. And he keeps doing that. I mean, I've been annotating as much as I can the sources, but I would love to at some point go and see all the Maimorim that he's basically integrated. You know, that would be an interesting thing, a map of all the Maimorim as seen through Ayin Beis.
Wow.
So basically, anything you learn in Chassidus, Ayin Beis is covering it somewhere. I mean, listen, there are ideas that are explained more in another Maimer, but he's touching, I have not seen any idea he's not touched. And he's all interwoven, how he brings it together. Pretty...
Talk about a good use of the mind, huh? Intellectual powerhouse.
Like the Rambam, for example, is brilliant. He took everything on Shabbos and put it in Hilchos Shabbos. Everything on Eruvin, Eruvin. Everything on Tshuva. But he didn't bring them all together into one halacha. Tshuva is not Hilchos Shabbos, you know. And the Rebbe Rashab is taking all the sugyas of Chassidus and interweaving them, that they're all interconnected. Yeah. I think I like this guy. Sorry for being irreverent.
Huh.
Yeah. Okay. 1,240 pages. So we'll stop here, top of the